When I told my husband yesterday we were in the garden, and I said, I gotta go, I have to go prepare for my introduction to Reeve. And he said, you don't need to introduce Reeve. Everybody knows and loves Reeve, which is, of course, true. But I just couldn't resist the opportunity to talk about how happy Liza and I are to have her here again. I have no idea how many times Reeve is read here. I do know that she has either 24 or 25 books out. I counted them about 3 times, but on the line, the books kept wiping past me, and I couldn't get a real good count. But 24, 25 books for both children and adults. And as she says in this new book of essays, she plans to keep on writing, so we figure we're going to have her back a couple times at least. Reeve has always seemed very down to earth, and although she grew up as the daughter of very famous parents, she herself is so normal, so much of a martyr, that she feels like a friend to everybody who meets her. My dad would have given her the best title he could have ever said to anybody, and I hope you like this, is she's a good egg. Do you remember that?
I love it.
Isn't that great? So after that, please welcome a good egg, Reeve Lindbergh, to the Norwich Bookstore.
You're a pretty good egg yourself. Well, it's delightful to be here, and I thank all of you for coming. I'm thrilled to have so many of you. I remember being here some of the times that I've been here. I remember sitting on the stairs, which was very pleasant and cozy, but was a little harder for you guys. And this is a terrific venue, a terrific area. My only problem is that I keep on looking at the books and thinking, oh, maybe I'll walk over there, and maybe I'll walk over there. And I see many, many good friends here. That's a treat. This book, Two Lives, was, I just started writing yet another group of kind of personal essays, which always, as I think, are about the same thing. They're always about my life, my kind of, quote, normal life at home and on the farm and around the community and around the state and here and there, visiting my children. You know, I go to New York sometimes, and now that I've got a daughter in California, once in a while I go there, but mainly I'm just kind of here. And then every so often that completely changes, and I go into my Lindbergh mode. And that's why I'd like to read you the first essay in this book, which is called Two Lives. There are others, you know, that you might enjoy. There's one called Chicken Yoga Rooster Soup, which is about keeping chickens, and there are others. There's one about kind of swimming or drowning in the archives, trying to get. I was trying to find references in the archives for permissions from my father's book, The Spirit of St. Louis, and I was pretty sure that I didn't have the right to give the permission, that I had to find somebody else, but boy, it was hard to find who it was. And that sounds crazy because it's been in our family for many, many, many years, but I know that the permissions passed from my father to my mother to the publisher, and then to the Warner Brothers, I believe. And then it kind of went on, and I couldn't remember who had permission for what. This was a musical permission I was looking. Anyway, that's another story. But there are a lot of little things that something strange.
I have to get this a little closer to you.
Okay. All right.
You can't hear in the
You can't hear in the back. I'm so sorry.
Hang on.
All right. Can it get any closer? Okay, I will. How about that? Is that working better? All right. So I think I'll read, which will keep me from moving back and forth and making it difficult for you, but I will also try to talk and not move. How's that? Yeah, good luck. So it goes like this. I often think I live two lives, one in the foreground and the other in the background, each life taking its turn. I have a real or normal life in the country where my husband and I live on an old farm at the end of a dirt road. We wear comfortable clothes, write books, raise sheep and chickens, are active in community life, and welcome our children and grandchildren whenever they come to visit. There's also an entirely different Lindbergh life, which requires putting on somewhat less comfortable clothes and traveling to places away from the farm where I attend meetings and give talks and where there are no chickens except for the kind on the menu, followed by words like cordon bleu and à la king in Kiev. In this second life, I stand up in front of groups of people and talk a little about the books I've written for children and adults, and a lot about the lives of my late parents, Charles A. and Anne Morrow Lindbergh. I've spoken about my parents on college campuses and Air Force bases, in museums and libraries and schools, to children and to adults around the country for many decades. When I finished with the meetings or the talks, I come home to Vermont, change clothes, and emerge from the limbo of travel and from my Lindbergh life. I settle down with my husband, the dogs, the sheep, and the chickens, immersing myself in farm and community until the next time when I put on my other wardrobe again and out I go. Maybe it's a strange way to live, coming and going and switching focus completely between one life and the other, moving from the present to the past, not even my own past, but my parents', and back again. Still, I've done this for so long that it feels like just another part of my routine, like going to the farmer's market or taking one of the dogs to the vet. One of the chief differences is that in my Lindbergh life, there are different questions to answer. Instead of, how long has she been limping? Or, do you want a bag for these? It's, what is your favorite memory of your father? Or, did your mother teach you to write? Or, what can you tell us about the kidnapping? Or, did your father really have other families? These questions are now so familiar that they don't trouble me much, though I can remember when some of them did. I first began to live two lives not long after my father's death in 1974. Before that, my father and my mother spoke for themselves, if they chose to speak at all. Most of their communication with the world was done in writing. Between the two of them, they published more than 20 books about their lives and reflections over the years. My father rarely spoke in public during my childhood in the late 1940s and the 1950s, though he had done so before I was born. He made speeches on behalf of the future of aviation after his 1927 flight from New York to Paris when he was in his mid-20s. And he spoke out against America's entrance into the Second World War as part of the now controversial isolationist movement when he was in his late 30s. Toward the end of his life, when he was in his 60s and I in my late teens and 20s, he began to speak out again. This time he talked about his growing concern for the environment worldwide and his conviction that we must achieve balance between the rapid development of technology and the preservation of nature. He spoke in the House chamber in Juneau, Alaska, in support of a bill that State Senator Lowell Thomas Jr. was proposing for the protection of Arctic wolves. He spoke to a radio audience in the Philippines on behalf of what was then called the monkey-eating eagle, but is now known as the Philippine eagle and has recently been proclaimed the national bird of the Philippines. He gave a speech in 1973 at his boyhood home in Little Falls, Minnesota, in which he reminisced about summers sleeping on the screened porch of that home, not far from the banks of the upper Mississippi River. He told the audience how very pleased he was that his boyhood home was now a national park, named in honor of his own father, C.A. Lindbergh. My father had come to believe that the establishment of parks and wilderness areas was a far greater sign of human progress than anything technology had achieved. I wasn't present for the speech itself, but have read it in print and have seen and heard him deliver it on film. He died in Maui, Hawaii, in 1974, only a year later. I like to think of my father returning to his childhood home as he neared the end of his life, remembering his Minnesota childhood and telling a local audience what he had come to care about more than anything else in the course of a full and adventurous life. I knew him best during this time, his conservation years, when his focus was absolute, as it had always been absolute, on whatever project or passion engaged him. He talked fervidly about his efforts to save the monkey-eating eagle, the blue whale in Japan, and the wildlife of East Africa. He was so electrically energetic that even when he was away, his influence remained and reverberated throughout the house. My mother was a different story entirely. During my childhood, my father was present even in his absence. His energy, his rules, his discipline lingering in the house, as did the woodsy outdoor scent of his winter jacket in the hall closet. Our mother, however, had the ability to be absent within her presence. She was completely with me, especially when I needed her. She always listened to my stories, always took my physical and emotional complaints seriously, and did not disappear into the world for weeks or months the way our father did. Still, she could go deeply into herself when I was sitting right there next to her. Her eyes would look off and away through the window over the mudflats and marsh grasses of Long Island Sound, one hand fingering a brooch at her neck. I remember it as a cameo in a silver frame with a bouquet of flowers against a black background, all fashioned of tiny, colorful, semi-precious stones. I knew that she was still there with me, but that she was also somewhere else. It was my mother who provided the steady, gentle background of my earliest days, in her knee-length floral print dresses and her dark curly hair held up and back at the sides in what I later learned was a common 1940s style, a kind of upward roll on both sides of the face with another roll over the forehead. My mother's coiffure was looser, curlier, and much less Hollywood glamorous than Betty Grable's or Ava Gardner's, but her hairdresser may have been trying for the same effect. My mother spoke in public only occasionally when invited to do so by an organization with which she was associated or by family members and friends. She liked to read aloud a piece she had carefully written ahead of time for the event, which might be an alumni program at Smith College, her granddaughter's graduation at Middlebury, or a talk given to members of the Cosmopolitan Club in New York City. This was a club that was originally created for governesses in the early 20th century because there was a sense that these were very well-educated women who spent all their lives with children. I know the feeling. We all remember. And the women who employed them created a club so that the governesses, the educated women who taught their children, would have a place to go. And then I think it was so popular that everybody else wanted to be part of that too, so it's still there. Anyway, when my parents spoke in public, there was rarely a question period after the talk. My father disliked being questioned to begin with, and had been uncomfortable with what he called the press ever since his flight to Paris in 1927. My mother said that once, when they were about to embark on one of their early survey flights together, charting the air routes for the first airlines, a reporter begged her husband to reveal at least which direction they were planning to take on this journey. My father responded solemnly, "Up." Over the course of his lifetime, my father became increasingly adept at disappearances. Even in Little Falls, in 1973, I cannot believe he would have been available to the crowd the way other speakers are after giving a talk. I imagine him slipping away before anybody in the audience could approach him, safe in the protective custody of the Minnesota Historical Society. So I may be wronging him here, because there would have been people who had known his parents and his grandparents, and I think he may well have just remained and talked to them. But I can't imagine him in a crowd answering questions. He didn't do press conferences. So, my mother, too, always had protectors for her speeches. I was often one of them, in the form of companions who took her away to find a cup of tea or a place to rest following her presentation. It was characteristic of both my parents to be quite open to the world in their spoken or written words, but much less willing to share themselves in person. Unlike my parents, I always expect to have questions from the audience after I give a talk. I often enjoy the questions part of the program best, in fact, because it feels like a conversation. I am relieved of the burden of doing all the talking, and I don't have to listen to myself, which can become tedious. So sometimes a tactful moderator will ask whether there are things I prefer not to talk about, questions that might be painful or difficult for me to answer. I always say that I will answer any question I'm asked to the best of my ability, though there may be questions to which I don't know the answer. A wonderful thing has happened to me after many years of speaking in public. I've completely lost my fear of answering questions and have gained the great freedom of simply telling the truth as far as I know it. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in living two lives. I think most people do this to some degree. When a person gets up in the morning and goes to school or to work, he or she leaves an at-home self behind. Salespeople have salesmanship selves. Office workers have at the office selves. Any teacher, whether in kindergarten or in college, has developed a teaching self. A teacher needs to be on in a certain way, just as an actor is on for the theater, film, or television. When the school day is over, or the cameras have stopped rolling, or the stage lights have dimmed, then you can be off, just yourself. The difference for me is that I never feel entirely off. Even when I think I'm completely free of it, Lindbergh life seeps into my everyday existence at the most unexpected moments. Then I find I move from a kind of low-key daily consciousness concerned with things like laundry, shopping, working in the garden, asking people to bake pies for the library bake sale, to another way of thinking entirely, a state of mind blended from instinct, training, and long experience. This is the way I confront my family's past. Hardly a day goes by, and never as much as a week, that I don't receive correspondence related to my father's aviation career, my parents' personal lives, my mother's and father's historical archives and legacies. One day I received 2 requests, one group from a group hoping to name their new in-flight magazine Lindbergh, because we believe that Charles Lindbergh personified the pioneering spirit, intelligence, and elegance the magazine will strive for. And another for an interview to discuss my father's 1927 flight. I was able to respond to both requests easily. In the first case, the family still follows my parents' policy not to use their names or likenesses for commercial purposes. In the second, I'd be glad to talk to the historian about my father's flight, but since it occurred 18 years before I was born, everything I know about it came from his books. My father rarely even mentioned the flight to me. If I asked him about it, he invariably responded, "Read my book." So eventually I did. I read all of his books and all my mother's, and I keep on reading them because I need to. Most of the ongoing Lindbergh literary responsibilities came to me after my parents died, because I've worked with editors and publishers in my own life for more than 30 years, and I've dealt with my mother's and father's letters and manuscripts and archives since the death of first one and then both parents. Even though my father has been dead for more than 40 years and my mother for 15, or a little more now, their written words continue to reverberate in my consciousness, and their lives still trail long tendrils across mine. Hundreds of other people, even now, are just as interested in my family as I am. Some of them are much more interested than I am. The researchers and biographers and scholars have been very helpful in supplying me with dates and times and verifying the accuracy of my own memories. How old was I when my father and I had a forced landing together? What year was it when my mother became the first licensed glider pilot in the United States? I used to pester A. Scott Berg with questions like these when he was writing Lindbergh, his Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of my father. During this time, I was writing my first memoir, Under a Wing, about growing up in my family. He also asked me questions, but he did so very discreetly and politely. Once, probably because I had expressed astonishment at hearing how many boxes of material he proposed to go through in the Lindbergh collection at the Sterling Library at Yale. 700, he said. I had no idea there were that many, not at all. He almost complained to me about some of the material he had discovered, items that had been saved by my parents and sent to the university to be kept there in perpetuity. Was it really necessary, he wondered, to save carbon copies of the handwritten notes to our teachers, excusing us from school for dental appointments? Small squares of blotting paper, probably made by cutting one of my mother's large desk blotters into tiny pieces, with each square covered with indecipherable reverse blottings of words from letters or diaries or grocery lists. Did I have any idea about this, he asked. I told him, because I couldn't resist, that at our house during my high school years there were always 2 cardboard boxes sitting at the top of the stairs to the basement. Next to the basement was the attached garage where my father kept the station wagon he used for local errands. He also drove this car to New Haven when he carried documents to the Yale archives. One box at the top of the basement stairs was labeled Yale for the station wagon. The other was labeled Dump. Could the labels or the boxes have been switched, I asked. If he had not been so well brought up, I think Scott would have hung up on me. It did sometimes seem that my father and mother either did not know how to separate archival material from what should be considered garbage, or did not have time to sort the material carefully before bringing the next load of boxes to Yale. My father was usually so meticulous in his habits that I was surprised at some of the things we found when I visited the library a few years ago with my brother Land, our niece Christina, and a friend and assistant, Carol Hyman. We were there to help the archivist make sense of some of the more questionable items in the Lindbergh collection. They needed to make some room, and we found folders full of brochures for summer camps that we children had attended over the years, along with brochures for summer camps that we did not attend. My brother Land's kindergarten paintings, about which he expressed the opinion that our mother had always had a feeling for fine art. Pale slips of mimeographed notices announcing PTA meetings and teachers' conferences at our schools. None of the archivists had felt they could discard any of this material without permission from the family. Poor archivists. We weeded out a good deal of it, though I'm not sure we dared to discard the kindergarten paintings. I'm still fascinated, despite my occasional complaints, by the publicity that surrounded my parents for most of their lives, no matter how hard they tried to escape it. I have an impulse to explore this phenomenon, and another even stronger one that wants to do exactly the opposite, fight against it, wrestle it down to human scale by bringing into the picture everything familiar and genuine that I knew. My father's toothbrush, his comb, the handkerchief in his pocket, the bright Mexican ribbons my mother wore in her hair, her underwear and stockings dripping over the shower curtain railings in the bathroom to dry, the horse chestnuts she kept in her coat pockets, shining deep mahogany from the invisible rubbing of her thumb. It seems to me now that fame, like disease or war, is the enemy of normal human life. It certainly was for my parents, especially during their first years together. I was ignorant in my childhood of something that became very clear to me later. My parents had no wish to live in the past for many reasons, but the greatest of these must have been that their early adventures were followed by terrible tragedy. The extraordinary fame of the 1920s and 30s had directly contributed to the kidnapping death of their first child, Charles, in 1932. After that horror, they left America, living for a time in England and France with my brothers, older brothers, and they shunned all forms of publicity for the greater part of their lives. Having been robbed of normalcy in a terrible way early on, they understood it for the treasure that it is and tried their best to offer this treasure to their children. How little I appreciate those efforts. I hated having to memorize a false surname when we were on vacation. Scott, Spencer, names close enough to our family to remember them, although I always forgot which one we were using at the time. And how outraged I was if my father made us get up and leave a restaurant because one of the waiters asked for his autograph. How embarrassed I felt. The little amount of attention that comes to me because of my parents' fame is a tiny fraction of what they faced every day during the time I was growing up. Still, when the past comes calling, whatever my circumstances may be at the time, I immediately snap into Lindbergh mode. I can't help it. Recently, my husband was, actually this was 2 years ago, but recently from the writing. Recently, my husband was diagnosed with bladder cancer. A tumor discovered during a checkup was surgically removed the same day. A second surgery followed within the month, and we were plunged into what I think of as cancer limbo, the time when a family knows the disease has struck, but has yet to find out what the prognosis will be. I was thinking about my husband's health all the time, driving him back and forth to a hospital an hour away, meaning Dartmouth, of course, feeding the sheep and chickens while trying to keep our spirits up, and the two of us fed. He is the cook in the family as well as the gardener, and he's much better than I am in both areas, so for me it was a matter of trying to keep the standards up. Some of our children arrived to help out, and communication within the family circle was constant and intense. At some time during this period, a friend received an email message from a woman who was aware that he knew me, and my friend sent the message my way as she had requested. The woman's late father had always thought he might be the missing Lindbergh baby. His daughter attached several photographs to the email to show how much this man had, or believed he had, looked like my father. I was unable to see the resemblance, though he was certainly a good-looking man, and his daughter clearly loved him and respected his belief that he was related. It might have seemed odd to move into Lindbergh mode that week of all weeks, but I did it, instinctively. The only answer I had for this woman was one that would disappoint her. It's the one I give over and over for a long time to people who believe that they or one of their relatives is really my long-lost brother, the missing Lindbergh baby. But there is no missing Lindbergh baby. I never had a long-lost brother. There was a dead child, my brother Charles, whose body was found a number of weeks after he had been kidnapped from his home in Hopewell, New Jersey in 1932. He was wearing his own clothes with his own teeth in his head, and he was identified by his doctor as well as his father, my father. Still, for some reason, some people have made a mystery of this tragedy for all the 80-odd intervening years. I will never understand how the stark fact of that child's death, a horrific injustice cutting short a life that had barely begun, has been lost again and again in so many bewildering apocryphal stories. The myth of the missing Lindbergh baby, the conspiracy theories implicating either my father, one of my aunts, other household members, or completely unassociated individuals whose names were in the news at that time, including Al Capone. The truth is that a very young child died during the course of a botched kidnapping, and his body was later found in the woods near his home. It was terrible, heartbreaking, and I don't think that my parents ever really got over it. It affected their individual lives and the life of their marriage forever. The fact and manner of my brother's death still shocks me every time something reminds me of it, even though he died more than 8 decades ago, long before I was born, and even when I'm in the midst of a present-day family crisis. I can sympathize with somebody else's difficult family story, and I can be sorry that another family history has linked itself with my family's long-ago loss. But to feel that sympathy and to be sorry about another family is as far away as I can move from the child who died, my parents' first son, my brother. He, the real child, is the heart of the case and remains close to my heart too, though I never knew him. During our time of medical intensity and cancer limbo, we received many messages and phone calls from our loved ones, our children, my brothers, cousins, nieces, nephews, my husband's family and friends. I also got a call from a beloved half-brother in Europe. I was unaware of this man's existence until 2003, when I traveled overseas to meet my half-brothers and half-sisters, the children of my father's relationships with 3 women he had come to know after the Second World War. These were women who knew each other. 2 of them were sisters, the other was their friend. Our father had visited them all regularly and had provided for them financially. I first found out about them through a letter from a half-brother whose mother was still living. He felt very strongly, and she did too, that the situation should remain private. I did not understand then even what he meant by the situation, until I read the news reports generated by another of these families. Their mother had died the same year my mother did, and her children saw no reason not to reveal themselves. The remaining two of the three families followed their mother's wishes and tried to stay out of the public eye. Though they did make friendly contact with our own family, they did so, indeed, in a very private way. I traveled to Europe and met all of them in the summer of 2003. I visited the home of one of the very discreet half-brothers during that summer, and we talked a lot during my visit. We took long walks together, speaking in English or in French, whichever was easiest. His English is better than my French, so we usually speak English during the telephone calls we've shared regularly over the years since that time. I have come to know and love this man since our meeting, and I'm glad that we can speak together often. In the midst of our cancer limbo, with doctor's appointments and medical procedures and worry all the time, he called me from Europe as usual, and I told him what was going on. He responded with characteristically thoughtful concern, and during the following weeks he sent several notes and postcards which I carried with me and read over while waiting for my husband's surgical procedures to be completed. While I was reading my half-brother's postcards and thinking about his warm-hearted concern for me and my family, I understood something simple yet stunning. It had little to do with jumping in and out of Lindbergh mode, or with celebrity, or even with history. Whatever the trouble, sorrow, or confusion there may be in either or both of my lives, whatever is disturbing, confusing, or bizarre about being a Lindbergh, it has brought me unexpected comfort to know I do have a long-lost brother, after all. That's sort of the heart of, or the core of what I was trying to do with this book. And then I kind of go off into chickens and trees and this and that, and but a little bit about airplanes, a lot of that kind of thing. And I'm very happy to answer any questions or entertain any discussion you'd like to have. And were you able to hear me? Did that work, or was I bumping too much? That worked most of the time? Okay, all right. Yes, right there.
What about your siblings? Like, have you become the one who's kind of the family historian that people contact more just because you're a writer, or?
I tend to be the one that people contact for information. I think partly because I have published things about the family and seem to and am more accessible. My brothers are here and there and out there, and my sister, of course, was Anne Lindbergh. She was quite shy about that, and she died in 1993, and was a wonderful writer and person. The other person who is involved in family, in sort of public family discussion, is my nephew, Eric Lindbergh, my older brother's son, who's a pilot and very much involved in kind of cutting-edge aviation environment work. And he's a very open-hearted, very easy to talk to kind of a person, and has no worry about being out in public and so on. And I think there are some who just don't like it at all. They're just quite uncomfortable, and there are others who are fine with it, like me and like Eric, and then there are all kind of ranges in between. And of course, there are my children who just aren't too interested. They say, "Oh, Mom, great, good, I'm glad you did that, that's wonderful," but they're just not interested. It's kind of diluted through the generations, and that's kind of fun too. Yeah.
Do you think your children will be interested one day?
I do. Will they be interested? I think they do have some interest, and I think as they get older, as happens with all of us, they will be looking. I think. I think they want us to be okay. So the interest is, if there's an issue or a trouble or something happens in the news that has to do with my family, and there's less of that over time, but they want me to be okay. Yeah. Yes, right here.
How is your husband?
My husband is fine. It's wonderful. We had 2 years of procedures and checking and not quite sure, and things seemed to come back. And then for over a year now, there's been nothing. But they watch him all the time, as has to happen with a cancer situation. He goes to his appointments and we think, and so far it's been great. So thank you for the question. Yeah, in the back.
I was struck by this reading the book, and then even more tonight, and I'm wondering if you've thought about it, what happened to your parents, all the things that happened to them.
Oh, yeah.
Happened to them at a time that is so different from now. I mean, if that happened now, it could happen to any number of 100 people. It would be a 5-day wonder, and it would be over.
That'd be gone, isn't it? It is
It
interesting.
made me realize that's part, because it was so big, and there wasn't
Yes.
anything else like it.
Yeah.
That must be one of the reasons that it.
That makes absolute sense. There was. I don't think I have. I don't think I've thought of it that way. I know that somebody from a writer for the New York Times told me that she was so upset to think that my parents' story kind of burst at the same time as the development of what they used to call the yellow press, the sensationalism of the press. Well, and some of that was engendered by my father's flight. There was so much attention. When he flew into Paris, he was worried about finding the place, the field. I mean, he was pretty good with his dead reckoning and all that, and he was able to have his compass, and he knew where he was going, and he looked down and he could see where pretty much where he was. But he was astonished because there were too many lights. He just couldn't figure out where there were all these lights. And when he finally landed and understood that there were just hundreds and hundreds of cars there to meet him, he had a letter of introduction in his pocket because he didn't know if anybody, he didn't know anybody, didn't speak French, and he thought he was going to have to find his way. Place to stay, find a hostel. But that just burst upon them, and he had no preparation for it. She had a little, because she was a diplomat's daughter, and she knew about crowds and this, but she was pretty shy as well. But I think they did extremely well, and I also think that they loved being on their own, just the two of them, being asked to do these surveys for the early airlines, where they had to go over the North Pole and down the coast of Africa and through South America. It was a lot of work for them to do that required them to be alone together. And my sense is that was a really wonderful, kind of perfect marriage time for them. And it wasn't so easy after that. But you had a sense, no matter what, you had a very strong sense of that bond between them. That was kind of stayed there. I mean, sometimes I thought, I don't know how anybody could live with my father for 10 minutes. And he was also wonderful, fascinating, full of energy, and compelling. It was really fun. And then he would go off on some tear or tangent, and you'd think, or he'd line us all up and give us a lecture on, keeping our property properly stowed or organized, or I don't know. He did quite a lot of lecturing, and he would call you into his office, and he would have a piece of paper. I'm sure I've written about this before. A list under your name, and I could, the way some children do, I could read upside down. So I would look, and I could see my name. I could see whether it was a short list or a long list, because you could be in there for an hour while he was just telling you the things that you needed to do and not do. Yes?
Is your mom related to Edward R. Murrow?
No, it's a different, it's her spelling was Morrow for her with an O. But yeah, I think she met him though. Does that count? Yeah. Yep, in the back. Yes?
You were publishing with the Vermont Press.
I sure was and am. It's Brigantine Media from St. Johnsbury.
How did you all connect?
I play tennis with the wife. It's a small press. They've published a couple of. They do a lot with. They do some textbook or manuals for teachers. They do some. I think they do some human relations kind of books, and they do once in a while they'll do a book that they like, that's a book for children, not for little children, not the ones that I do, but young adult books. I did one by Jenny Mackenzie about the abolitionist movement, and it's a fiction. It's fiction called The Spare Room, and one of Beth Cannell's books. And they did a couple of the late poet Philip Reeve. They, they sort of. They get interested in something and they do it, kind of something that's kind of out of their area. But if you look them up online, Brigantine Media, and you can see what they do. But they're friends. And I was complaining because my last book, I wasn't complaining about that because I had a wonderful time writing the last book I did with Simon and Schuster. I was starting to work on this one with my editor, and I said, should we have a contract? And he said, oh, don't we have a contract? And he's so sweet, very nice man. And he went to the boss, the publishers, and they said, no, because she didn't sell enough copies. There were this many in hardcover and this many in paperback, and that we can't do another contract. And he was very kind to me. I said, don't worry about it. I've got some good friends who are publishers here. And I talked to them, and they said, yeah, we'll do your book. And I told them that I hadn't sold that many copies. I said, I think it was 10,000 hardcover and 5,000 paperback. And he said, Reeve, if we sell 1,000 copies, we're happy. I said, don't worry about it. So we worked together, and their daughter, who is about 28 and went to school with my son, and is just terrific. She's a wonderful poet, and she's doing a PhD in English in New York and teaches, and she's just a lovely, lovely editor. So I wouldn't tell my Simon & Schuster editor this, but it was fun working with her. So in fact, we had the book launch, which was the first reading I did with this book was at the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. And the publisher said, we'll bring refreshments. And we got there, and what they had was a whole bunch of local beer. So it was just, I thought, never, ever would this happen anywhere else. So that was delightful. And it's a treat to work locally. I just loved it. The publishers, the editor, the author, the beer, everything was local. Yeah.
What are you working on now?
I think I'm working on another one. No, I just kind of started. I'm just doing a little, I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but I'm sure it'll be more kind of the essays. I don't know, I don't really know till I do it, what I'm doing. But, yeah.
Are you probing some sort of topic?
What I'm working right this minute, what I'm working on is about changes, changing and changes in our lives, and I don't know, transitions, I guess. But that's odd. I just kind of got going, and I'll see what happens. I'll see where it goes. But it's just one little piece of one essay. But when I'm writing, I think, oh, good, I'm writing. But I don't know what I'm writing until I get a little further along. Yeah.
I recently watched a video that you had done a reading at a bookstore, I believe it was in Durham, New Hampshire.
Okay. Yep.
And I think it was back in '97.
Oh.
And you had said two things that were really touching. One was about your father reprimanding you and your mother for feeding a stray dog.
Oh. Yeah.
And then you caught him when he didn't know you were looking, actually feeding the dog himself.
Yes, absolutely.
And another was you said that you wanted, your mother always said that if anything was worth anything, write it down.
Yes, she did. She always said that. She said, and she was great that way, because you'd just be having a conversation and you said, oh, that's a lovely thought, dear, write it down. But it was, that was very important, and kept me just jotting things down. And it's extraordinary, even if, I do a little in a journal, but I'm terrible. I don't do it every day. Sometimes I just do a tiny bit. But if I look, excuse me. But if I look back, there are always things I can use, and seems to be a nice habit. It's helpful.
So you have her journals?
We have her journals. She published a great many of them, and the others are at the Yale, the Sterling Archives, or at Smith. Her journals actually are at Smith, excuse me, but she does have material at Yale as well. Yeah. Yes, Hannah.
Yeah, it's just, I've read one or two volumes of your mother's journals.
Yes.
So beautifully written, and also quite revealing, and
Yes.
I was just wondering, for somebody who really valued her privacy so much.
It is,
Did you
it's a,
struggle much over what to, publish and what not to, or even to publish them at all?
I think she did struggle about what to publish and what to say, but I think there is a real dance between privacy and revelation, and I know I engage in that same thing. You value your daily life, your privacy, your being out of the public eye or whatever that might be, but you still need to communicate. And one of the habits that I think she grew up with and that we grew up with was to write down, to write things down. And it was her publisher who encouraged her to publish diaries and letters. And that started at the time, I'm not even sure my father had died, but it was the period when he was very ill with cancer himself, and she was working with her editor, Helen Wolfe, who lived here in Hanover at the end of her life, and they started with the very early journals of her when she was at college and just met my father, and then they just kept on going. And there were things that I think may have been hard for her, but she wanted to publish those things. And then there were things that were not that interesting. I remember her coming back and saying, well, Helen just told me that this is a letter nobody but a mother could love. so they took that one out. But when we worked on the volume of my mother's diaries and letters that we edited and published in 2012, we found thousands of pages of unpublished material. Because, of course, if she wrote that voluminously, and there's a lot of material still there. I have one of my nieces is very interested in that material, so maybe there will be more. But there was so much of the written, and I do think that was the struggle. What's private, what's public, how important is it to, and my father liked to set the record straight, so it was important to him to set the record straight, to publish. And so that's what they kept on doing. But that's I think a very important point. What is that? What's the balance between the privacy and the communication? I guess most writers are dealing with that too.
So how do you deal with that? Like, where did you draw the line?
Where do I draw the line? I don't exactly draw the line. I think there are things that I self-censor, that I just don't put in. And then there are things that I find myself putting in and wondering if that's okay. I talked to my husband about whether it was okay to talk about the cancer, and he said, oh yeah, but I worried. And there are, I asked, even the funny little crazy essay called Chicken Yoga Rooster Soup, where we are working with some friends of ours with various chicken issues, and I said, is it okay if I mention your names? And they said, oh, sure. But some people don't like it, so you have to ask. Yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
As a writer, and people probably ask you this question all the time, what kind of discipline, when do you write?
Oh, when do I write? You are a writer. I'm going to ask you that question, but she's very much a writer.
I want to know how you're
It depends on what I'm after. If I've got something in mind, like this little piece I kind of started a little while ago, I have it available. So I might just write a little bit every day. I'm not a person who shuts herself in a room unless I have a deadline. And somebody said I need this piece by the, end of April. Then I do it. Then I just sit down and I do it. But if I'm working on my own, I do not have. I wish I had better habits. But I try to keep that on my desk or on wherever it is that I'm working on other things. I put that. I do things to fool myself or to kind of force myself to pay attention to the writing. And I find even if I just write a few lines or a few paragraphs or a day or a week, if I have it if I'm connected to that piece, I know I'm going to keep working. But if it's, I have to get this done and that done and the other thing, and then I'll write, it doesn't work for me. I have to keep it in train as part of my life, or I am going to put it off forever. And I noticed in my mother's journals and diaries and her letters, she's so often apologizing for not writing. And sometimes she is writing as she apologizes for not writing. I thought, oh boy, is that true for me too. Just, do you have a discipline yourself, Felicity? Do you have a time that you work? And
No.
no, it's hard. Some people really do it.
No, I mean, when I was doing my book, I did tend to go up into my little office.
Yeah.
And shut myself off.
Yeah.
And I found that I could really do no more than 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm impressed. 2 hours is good,
hours.
but sometimes you need to have 4 hours
Yeah.
in order to get that 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of just having it right there, because, the stairs are harder. And,
Yeah, I did that too, and now I've been storing things in my office, so now I write at the kitchen.
And all that
That's right. So I do a lot of kitchen table work, where I'm right there. I'm going to be there anyway, and I just have but that's not so much.
Right, or do you
I do both. I get started just writing, and then I put it on the computer, and I've now gotten so that I can do a little bit on the. In my handwriting, which I will always do to start my writing, and then I can go to the computer and I can continue to work. I didn't used to be able to do that. I used to have to write the whole thing, like writing a paper, where you write the paper and then you type the paper. And now I'm a little more able to do it all, or most of it, with the computer. Yeah.
How did you come to live in Vermont?
Oh, I came to live in Vermont back in 1968, I think. Yeah, I came as a teacher with my first husband, Richard Brown, who has been here with his wonderful new book about the hill farms, or will be. But we came right out of college, and we were both teachers in southern Vermont, and he taught in Whitingham. No, he's not still here. One of his fellow teachers was here for a bit. But he taught in Whitingham in the high school, and I taught in Reedsboro, Vermont. Little town, Reedsboro, and mostly it was Italian families who had come in generations past to I don't know, build railroads, do this and that. And the families were wonderful. There were very few of them. I had about 12 kids in one year and 10 the next, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I loved it. So that's how we got here teaching. And then we moved north, and we're here in Peacham for many years. And then we had a little boy who died, and little one, and that just, it's funny, it just sort of separated our lives. And so that's how we separated. And I remarried, who was to a good friend and writer, and he's remarried to another artist. So there we are. We have great, wonderful grandchildren together, and we get along pretty well. But I do think that the loss of a child does something to and I think it might have happened to my parents as well. And they never separated officially, but they had a good deal of separation within that marriage and a good deal of continued loyalty, both of those things. It's an interesting combination. Yep.
One more question.
One more question.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
You can do it.
I'm curious, I mean, given what you've just said, and also looking at your mother who lost a child, and all the trauma that really went on in those relationships, and your father being so very different from your mother, I'm wondering what your mother-daughter relationship was like. And there's so much written today about mothers and daughters.
Yeah.
So how would you characterize that?
Well, I think it was pretty close, and she was very close as well to my sister. It was, we always, she was tiny and vivid and dark with blue eyes, and my sister and I thought we felt like, milkmaids or something, because we were both taller than she was and kind of blonde, and, we were not 5 feet, and I don't know, we just thought we were galumphing compared to her. But she was such an influence. I think we always wanted to either be like her or be worthy of her. And she tended to be very, very easily close to us. She had sisters and was close to her mother. And I think, and especially when I lost that child, it was extraordinary. She was right there with me. She was there. It happened at her house, and he just died in the night. And she was unbelievably strong. She did not, I mean, I would have thought it would be impossible having, to see that experience repeated with your daughter. But she was so strong for me. And she, what did she say? She said something wonderful. She said, well, part of you will die with him, and the rest of you will go on. Did you have to? And that was so perfect for me, because I felt like that. But I can't think of anybody I would rather have with me at that time. That was it, right? That was it. Well, thank you. Thank you.